comfortable, do you want to slide back a little bit?
Oh,
If
perfect.
you're comfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One friend of mine went on a boat ride between like ice. It was crazy between ice bird things. And they were on a boat in the cold. Yeah, well, I mean, it's an adventure, I'll tell you. It's an adventure. And plus, all the along. When you win, you can't lose. I was actually planning, trying to visit myself. And I was going to call my home for some use as a travel person. Is Corey got the one life to run for governor? And they said, we need somebody to take Corey up this big guy. So I said, I'll go. Well, now you gotta just start thinking a little bit. Oh, is that right? For 45 days for like
50 grand.
yeah.
Yeah.
And no, I'm just wishing.
Did you see, like, a lot of them are already sold out, like the 70 to 140K on that cruise?
Talk about the haves and have-nots. Holy buckets. I'm not in the have. So in case you ever wonder.
So when COVID breaks out, I should how does that happen?
Yeah, right. No matter how much money you have, you're still gonna be strapped.
They always come in.
That's
I know.
Talking to people,
Have been
stuck
straight
on
I forgot that we're next to
cruise
the
ship.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Early 2020.
There was the Diamond Princess, there was that couple from here, yeah.
Yeah, and they
From,
didn't
yeah,
they
from
set
up north.
everybody, and they
Yes.
set their food out in the hallway, and it's just
Yeah,
awful.
they were stuck in their cabin the whole time.
Yeah.
And I was talking to them on FaceTime.
Oh, you gotta be so careful. Especially if you're on the little inside.
Right,
Not
not
in
the
the direction.
basically ones for balcony, yeah.
Little balcony would be possible, right?
It was 74 hours. What was all that before? That's like something
74 hours
a week.
a week of overtime.
No, 12 hours.
Yeah.
Can I get a girl in a package now?
As long as you do it like that, yes.
I've determined that I have to do it.
Yeah, I can go that.
I saw my papers now, so we're done time.
Yeah. But where's Norm? Thought I they're not there, I don't know where it can't be that far. Sort of that stepping over some of your shit.
You're going into the visible matrix. Red colors moves out.
Here it is. Can I? Don't you really like
that again?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so if there's like, why are we having, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. It's really kind of research.
Just me, sorry. Hi everyone, I'm Katie in the mayor's office. They'll be over here shortly. The mayor does have a meeting at 1:30, so I might have to cut it off a little bit quick.
Why are they
but
late, why are they late now? It's supposed to start at 1, right?
yes, he had an external event.
Okay.
But if you need further clarification or further information on the matrix or anything, Chief Huffman can be available and we can work with Howie, her spokesperson, to schedule that. So we want to make sure you have the information that you need.
Good afternoon, everyone. Over the past couple of years, we've moved forward dozens of reforms to our Minneapolis Police Department, and we aren't stopping now. You've probably seen the press release that was issued earlier this morning, but today's announcement is largely focusing on two different areas. The first is limitations on the number of hours that officers are able to work each week, and then the second one is a new and revised disciplinary matrix that will provide clarity and transparency for both officers and the general public. First, officers need to be on their best while they're on duty. We want our Minneapolis police officers to be their best versions of self. They need the ability to recalibrate between some of these very difficult calls. And when they get home at the end of the day or at the end of the night, they need a proper amount of rest so that they're able to rejuvenate for the next day. Let's be real. Our police officers are tackling some of the most difficult circumstances that anyone will ever see or experience, and we want to make sure that they're at their very best. This new limitation will make sure that officers have that necessary time to rest and recuperate. It'll help our officers be their best versions of self. Additionally, we've updated the disciplinary matrix. We updated the disciplinary matrix back in 2018, but this go-round is to make it incredibly clear, and to be very honest with you, it needed additional clarity. This is the 2018 version right here. It's basically looking at like the Da Vinci Code or something that you've got to crack. It's like a maze that you got to find your way through, and we wanted to see some drastic improvements both for our officers so that there was clarity, transparency for the general public, and that we were ensuring that we would hold officers accountable that needed to be held accountable. This level of clarity, I think, is really important, and we want to set a new standard for how we're releasing and how we're talking about our disciplinary matrices going forward. Importantly, the updated matrix, it emphasizes the evaluation of policy violations considering the harm and considering the risk of that particular interaction and of the misconduct. The harm or risk of harm can be to the safety of a community member or the officer or the general public. So this framework of harm has not been explicitly included in previous versions of the matrix and is included in this one. Furthermore, the matrix itself identifies a number of infractions that move towards what would essentially be automatic termination. This work was essential just so that both officers and the general public had a good sense of what forms of misconduct, what forms of harm and or risk of harm would ultimately lead to some of the more serious disciplinary areas. Again, we've moved substantially from a disciplinary matrix that was very confusing, and the one that you should have is much more straightforward, and the chief should be able to answer a lot of the questions about that in just a few minutes. So I want to give a big thank you to our interim chief, Amelia Huffman, for all the work that she did in setting up both this disciplinary matrix as well as the hours standards. I want to give a huge thank you to our police officers who are really doing an incredible job, and there are stories that come across my desk just about every other day highlighting the heroic efforts that they are taking in community day in and day out through some of people's most difficult circumstances in life. They're the ones that are running towards the danger when so many of the rest of us would shy away from it. I also want to give a huge thank you to our Council Vice President Lene Palmisano, who's here with us, as well as Councilmember Latricia Vitaw. I know Councilmember Palmisano has championed officer health and wellness for many years, and Councilmember Vitaw is the head of our Public Safety Committee and has been working hand in glove with us on a daily basis. Really appreciate you all for being here. We're happy to answer some questions after this thing gets wrapped up, but for now I want to turn it over to our Interim Chief, Amelia Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank all of you for being here this afternoon. Over the past 2 years, our officers have continued to show up day in and day out, shift after shift, to provide critically important and oftentimes very difficult public safety services. They're working to assist in times of crisis, protecting lives and safety, keeping the peace, and upholding the law. They can only provide the very best service to members of our community when they're supported with access to strong mental health and wellness programs, policies that support adequate rest and time to recharge, and a disciplinary framework that is fair and consistent and upholds the values of this department. I know you've heard me say it before at other press conferences, and I'll say it again today. As an organization, we must invest in our people, our processes, and our policies so that we can provide the public safety services that citizens and all stakeholders in Minneapolis want and deserve, and so that our workplace can be a place where our employees thrive and grow in strong careers. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the new health and wellness initiatives, the discipline matrix, the new position that we're hiring for, the trauma-informed psychological services RFP, or any of the other related issues.
Do you have any idea how much?
I'm sorry, Liz, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes. Liz Naverhill, Star Tribune. Do you have any idea how much overtime officers are generally working now, or how many might be impacted by this?
Mm-hmm. So that's a good question about how many officers may be impacted on the duty time restriction policy. So certainly as we were crafting this policy language, we took a look at how many folks were likely to be impacted by the new restrictions. And those include not working any more than 16 consecutive hours, making sure that there are 24 full hours each week with no work of any kind, whether that's regular work, off-duty work, buyback work, overtime work, and also capping the total number of hours during the week at 74. As we look at those independent variables, there's a relatively small group of officers who would be affected by changes in any of three categories. So this is not a case where 75% of the officers in the department were working more than 74 hours a week. It is a relatively smaller group of officers who are impacted. But nonetheless, it is important to make those changes because our folks need to be at their best when they come to work. And that means having adequate time to rest and recharge. The reality is that we do have very significant staffing challenges at this point, and we need to be able to balance the need to protect employees' off time and the need to provide critical public safety services, and this policy does both of those things.
Matt Sepik with NPR News. Was there a limit at all before this 74-hour rule that is in effect now?
That's a good question about whether there was a limit in our policy before. And the answer is no. There was no hard limit written into our policy before.
And does the 74 hours include off-duty time as well, doing other jobs outside of MPD official duties?
Yes. The 74-hour cap includes regular duty, off-duty, and buyback, as well as overtime shifts.
Eric Shalhoub, KSTP channel, for the deputy interim chief, and the mayor too. We've reported, you mentioned it too, about people leaving. Is this your hopes that they'll stay? Because I know this has been one of the main reasons a lot of them have been leaving is the burnout. Can you talk about that and your hopes going forward with what this will do? Is it a big moment? Do other departments have policies like this?
Yeah, that's a great question about whether other departments have policies and what our hopes are for all of these investments related to wellness. So other departments have varying kinds of policies. There are departments that have no caps written into their policy, much like we did, whether that's the number of consecutive hours in a day or a week or in a total pay period, and others that have caps for the total number of hours per week set at 80 or 64. So there's a real range of policy language that's out there in other agencies. I do want to make sure that our employees know that their off time is important. Their ability to rest and recharge, to connect with family and friends, to take time away from this job, which is very difficult and very demanding, is incredibly important. It's important not only so that they can come back to work and be at their best as employees, because it's important to take care of themselves as people, for their families and their friends and their communities. I also think that the other investments that we're making in health and wellness are incredibly important and go hand in hand with the duty time restriction. So up to this point, we have identified a lack of really comprehensive mental health services as a need in the department. And so the RFP that was posted to the city website a few weeks ago is really an attempt to bring more comprehensive services to our folks, those trauma-informed psychological services, so that we have the ability to do critical incident debriefing when folks have a traumatic incident that they experience at work within a very short time frame, that we can bring people together to have a conversation with a mental health professional, so that we can have some ongoing support groups in the department to help improve folks' access to services and the resiliency of our department members, so that we can improve our training and our support for the peer support team members who reach out to their peers in the department to help lift up mental health services and make connections. So those services will be getting much stronger going forward.
Chief, what's the average number of hours people in your department work now, if you know that?
I don't have the statistics at the tip of my fingers, but we can certainly get you that.
But suffice it to say, there's not a lot of people working more than 74 hours.
Yeah, it's been a relatively small group of people, compared to the entire number of employees on the department who've consistently worked more than 74 hours.
Susie, WC Sorio, can you explain the disciplinary matrix kind of in very, very simple terms? Like if someone, an officer, has a complaint against them, is that what it's designed for, so the public can see?
Yes, thanks for the question about the discipline matrix. So the discipline matrix is one piece of our overall discipline system. It's a very important piece because it lays out the framework for how we're going to evaluate what discipline is appropriate when an investigation has shown that there was a policy violation, so there was an error in judgment or an act of misconduct. The disciplinary framework then lays out the harm and the risk of harm associated with that error in judgment or policy violation to set the level of what the penalty for that violation would be.
And then the public can see that?
So the discipline matrix is posted on the city website. It's accessible to anyone in the public. It's available online for folks in the community to read and scrutinize.
Are there any new offenses that could result in termination in this new matrix versus the old one?
So the old matrix did not attempt to cover every violation in our policy and procedure manual. We have 10 volumes of policy and procedure, so it is quite an extensive manual. And neither the old matrix or the new matrix attempts to set the penalty for every possible violation. What the new matrix does is really provide this framework for evaluating within the framework of risk and harm to make those decisions about the appropriate level of discipline. And it does describe more comprehensively and clearly the kind of violations that could result in termination, that would result in termination. Those include some things that were identified in the previous matrix, such as untruthfulness, and other things like sexual harassment and acts of bias or discrimination, and other kinds of very serious policy violations that are clearly incompatible with remaining working for the Minneapolis Police Department.
Question for the mayor and council members. I see council's considering a measure to increase the police chief's salary. How did you arrive at that new new number, and what is the status of the search for a full-time chief?
Thanks for the question, Liz. I'll give a crack at it first. We need an extraordinary new police chief to make sure they are taking the reins and leading our city forward here. And needless to say, this is a very difficult job. In order to recruit in and bring on the best and the brightest, we're going to need to make sure that they are properly compensated. There's a governor's salary cap that is presently somewhere in the range of $194,000, I believe, and we felt strongly that in order to recruit either from within or without of our Minneapolis Police Department, we would need to properly pay for it. And so the figure that you have seen is the top figure that can be paid for a new police chief. And I also want to note that that's not the only position that we're presently looking for. We are also looking to hire a commissioner of the Office of Community Safety. This is the individual that would oversee not just the Minneapolis Police Department, but our Minneapolis Fire Department, our Office of Violence Prevention, EMS, mental health responders, Office of Violence Prevention, et cetera. And it would be helpful, and I would very much prefer that we brought on the commissioner of the Office of Community Safety prior to the ultimate hiring of a police chief. It makes sense given that that partnership is going to be critical, and we're going to want to make sure that they maintain a very good working relationship.
Mayor, what was behind the decision to begin negotiations finally with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights after city staff declined to attend the first two meetings last month and this month? Why the change now to begin those negotiations?
Well, first let me state what I've already stated before, but I want to say it extremely clearly. We want a consent decree. We want one consent decree. So I'm not saying 0 and I'm not saying 2. I support moving forward with one consent decree. As you know, we have 2 different investigations that are, one has just finished up, and the Department of Justice investigation we anticipate will be completed at some point this year. To have 2 different monitors, to have a federal judge and a state judge, to have 2 different documents that we are required to abide by, that will result in a slower pace of reform. So to be clear, we want a consent decree. I support moving forward ultimately with a consent decree. We know there are significant issues within our police department that we have to sort through and correct for good. Now is the time to do it right. And you know, I am not aware of other cities that have consent decrees on the same topic in the same police department. That's not to say they don't exist. I'm just not aware of any, and for our purposes, we're either asking for one, and or we're asking for the MDHR and the DOJ to work together.
Would you rather have a state judge oversee the department or a federal judge? Does it make a difference?
You know, we haven't gotten that far at this point, but the priority here is to, yes, have a consent decree, but to make sure that there is one.
I think we have time for one more question.
Mayor, can you provide any updates on the hiring of this public safety or community safety commissioner? Has that been posted? Do you have candidates yet?
We've been doing quite a bit of recruiting over the last several months, making sure that we're reaching out to some of the most talented individuals throughout the country in not just the public safety or law enforcement area, but also in terms of the managerial capacities, which inevitably they will need to have at a very high degree. You know, I think soon is the best answer that I can give you, but I don't want to put a finite date on it.
And do you need council to sign off on a government structure change before you can hire that commissioner?
I don't want to give you wrong information about the specific procedural items. The goal would be to first, so as you know, we're working through an entire government structure right now. We want to make sure that we're moving expediently, and at the same time we want to make sure we're getting it right. Of the items of priority, I believe setting up the Office of Community Safety is of the highest. So we want that to be priority and step number one, setting up the Office of Community Safety and bringing on a commissioner that can help build out the overarching department itself.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And if you missed it, we did have both the 2018 version of the Matrix and the new one out in that back table, and so they're gone, so hopefully you got them.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice to meet you. I didn't mean to get rough on late times, but I've always annoyed that things don't start. Sorry.
There's not, it's on, I know it's on page 106 of the full policy online, and that was in the press release too, but I didn't print that out.
Okay. Page 106
Page 106
of
of
the,
the full MPD policy.
oh, is that online too?
Yes, it is, yeah, and it's linked in the press release.
Oh, yes, okay, all right. They probably got it back to the station. I just, if somebody has me, where's my information I have to get the matrix?
You can send them to me
All right,
if they ask you.
all right,
Happy to do that.
all right.
Nice to see you, Matt.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Well, they'll know how to get a hold of it.
Yes, yep, my name is on all the press releases and my phone number's on there. I don't have cards on me right now, but
No, it's fine, not complicated. I can ask. I do not know. Yep. Yep. I'll get you the 28. Yep. Well, tell Dan I said hi to 20.
When I mention your name, he'll be like, what did he say?
Yeah. Doggone it. I didn't have him as a reference.
We're just chatting, he hasn't even applied for it.
thank you.
Oh, I did. Here you go.